Hello, everybody. Uh, I'm Pablo Mhanna-Sandoval. I'm with the board of the Canadian International Council, National Capital Branch. I'm honored to be able to moderate tonight's excellent panel event, a discussion with many graduates from across the country who are here to share their experiences with us about their graduate studies, how they got there, and of course, what came after. I know that even if I wasn't involved with the Canadian National Council, I would be very, very eager to attend such a panel. It definitely captures a lot of the important themes on the minds of people in third and fourth year of their undergraduate studies, or people wishing to return to studies after a work break. There's a variety of lived experiences represented here, and that's why it's such an honor for me to be able to moderate such an excellent event. Throughout all of this, of course, this panel, of course, is a continuation, a follow-up to the 2019-2020 edition of the CIC mentorship program, which connects young professionals and undergraduate students with more experienced professionals in the field of international affairs. Through the mentorship program and the panel event, an excellent partner of the CIC's has been RBC, particularly through its community engagement branch. And that is why it's my pleasure and honor to introduce Ms. Linda Newman, VP Commercial Banking at RBC, and invite her to deliver some remarks today.
Good, thank you, Pablo. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Thank you, Pablo, for that kind introduction. This really is a special event. There will be so much learning and sharing of skills and information this evening. I had the opportunity actually of attending the CIC mentor matching event about a year ago. I guess it seems like time flies right now. I had the opportunity to attend the event when we hosted it at 90 Spark Street. I have to say I was really inspired and engaged by the youth that were there, as well as the passion of the mentors that were attending there for the match. But obviously we know this year is different, or this time is different, and we're I guess pivoting to sort of these virtual events in a virtual room. But you're all exceptional examples to all of us, so thank you. You're taking steps to learn new things and receive mentorship from individuals in your desired field. Congratulations on the initiative you've taken to attend this evening's event. The knowledge and skills you'll learn from this event will not only help you in your next steps in education, but they are increasingly becoming the types of skills required to succeed in the new world of work. At RBC, we know the importance of supporting young people as they embark on their career journeys. I'm so excited to be in a, let's call it, virtual room filled with like-minded people who share a common goal, which is to unlock the potential of young people, helping them thrive and drive Canada's future prosperity. Young people have the confidence, capabilities, and inspiration to reimagine the way our country works and to chart a more prosperous and inclusive future for us all. When young people succeed, we all win. As parents, educators, governments, youth services organizations, employers, and the society at large. The RBC Future Launch Program is acting as a catalyst for change. Since this initiative's inception in 2017 and over the next several years, we will continue acting as a convening power, taking a more than money approach to helping young people access meaningful employment through work experience, skill development, networking, and mental well-being supports and services. We've made long-standing commitments to work collaboratively with all stakeholders, including government, educators, and the public, and private sector, most importantly with young people directly, to drive change, co-create solutions, and break down the barriers young people face when transitioning from school to work. We value our partnership with CIC and the important work you deliver in partnerships across our country. It's an investment in our collective future. And I'd like to thank CIC for their continued partnership and commitment to our nation's young people. With that, I'll turn you back over to your exciting panel, and I'm sure the great dialogue is about to happen. So thanks very much, Pablo, and enjoy the evening.
Thank you very much, Ms. Newman. The RBC Future Launch Program and RBC itself has been an excellent partner, as I mentioned. So I appreciate your attendance today and, of course, RBC's continued partnership. Thank you so much. Some housekeeping notes. You will be able to submit questions for our Q&A period after the moderated panel discussion. For those on the YouTube live stream who are not able to enter the Zoom call, you can use Slido using the link provided to you in your email. And for those in the Zoom call, you can actually use Zoom's Q&A feature that's built into the app. We'll be moderating both Slido and Zoom for questions later on. Absolutely. A little bit about myself. I'm Pablo Mhanna-Sandoval. I'm a board member at the CIC National Capital Branch, as well as an undergraduate student at Carleton University, and I'm honored to be a moderator for this panel tonight. Our esteemed panelists, a real all-star cast, if I can allow myself to describe it that way, include Hingman Leung, who studied intercultural and international communications at Royal Roads University, of course, a master's degree, and is currently a policy and strategy analyst at the International Development Research Center. Thank you so much for your attendance. Michael Thomas, who studied at the Monk School of Global Affairs at the University of Toronto and is currently manager of research and insights at the Strategy and Transformation Services Division at RBC. Thank you so much. Next, Dr. Priya Bala-Miller, who obtained her PhD at the University of British Columbia and her master's in conflict analysis and management at Royal Roads University, and is also the founder and CEO of Palmyra Partners. Welcome, Dr. Bala-Miller. Then we have Lauren Audas, who is a graduate of the University of Ottawa Graduate School of Public and International Affairs and is currently a development officer at the, on the Afghanistan desk at Global Affairs Canada. Welcome, Lauren. And of course, Ali Teshbar, who is a Norman Paterson School of International Affairs graduate from Carleton University, and of course, University of Ottawa law degree holder. Of course, it's the dual degree program that many of us know so well. Welcome, Ali. He is a senior analyst at the Government of Canada's Artificial Intelligence Hub, doing great work. Thank you so much to our attendees. Again, a great variety of lived experiences, and what better way to showcase that than by jumping directly into our moderated panel discussion. I guess my first question, and one that I know is on many people's minds, is how you decided to pursue a graduate degree, and at what point in your studies or your career did the decision come to you? Many people, I'm sure, in the audience are perhaps anxious about the little time that's left, they might think. At what point in terms of the timeline did you know that this was the right step for you?
Thanks, Pablo, for the question. I think that's one that I can take. First of all, thank you so much for having me in this discussion. It's I'm very pleased to participate and also learn from others from this panel, and I'm very much looking forward to the conversation that we're going to be having. Now, in order to answer your question, I think I need to tell you a little bit about my background and how I got to where I am now, and when I got to the point of deciding to pursue graduate studies. So a long time ago, I did my undergraduate at the University of Waterloo. It was a joint Bachelor of Environmental Studies, and through that process, I was part of the co-op program, and I was able to gain a lot of experience at different levels of government. So through the co-op program, I worked at the federal level, at the provincial level, and ultra-local level at the city. And this gave me a really good look at what kind of work there is in government in different levels, and also in the environmental field. So my undergraduate was also, as I mentioned, a joint degree. So I also studied music, and I did some research on environmental activism and music. And that was actually the start of my interest in the place where science and policy meet. So when we learn things through science, how do people actually change their behaviors, and how does that actually turn into policy? And through kind of that thread, and because of the co-op program, I was able to be bridged into Environment and Climate Change Canada, into the domestic waste division. So I became a program officer there, working on domestic waste policy. And slowly through that process, because Canada also has international agreements on waste with other countries, for example, through the OECD and through the UN, I started working on the international file as well. And through that process, actually became a bit of a subject matter expert on waste policy. And that's when I started working more with international partners and thinking, oh, there's a big world out there. And Canada has a big role to play. And then I was thinking about what next. So from my undergraduate until that point, it's been about 4 or 5 years had passed since I graduated. And that's when I started thinking about where to go from there. Do I keep on this waste file, keep working internationally? Where can I go from there? And I started looking at the jobs that are available in waste policy and international work. And that's when I started thinking about doing a graduate degree, because if you look at any of the jobs that are posted on at the OECD or at the UN, it's standard. Everyone needs to have a graduate degree. And even if I were to pursue something in Canada, the kind of jobs that I was going for also require a graduate degree. And so for 4.5 years after graduating from my undergrad was when I decided, okay, to go to the next step, I'm going to need something else.
Absolutely. So there is a gap between your undergraduate degree and your graduate degree following a work period. Dr. Bala-Miller, Priya, I should say, my understanding is that you went directly from your undergraduate degree to postgraduate studies. How was that for you?
Yeah, so no, I'm happy to follow along, and maybe I'll follow Hingman's lead in giving just a little bit of context before I dive into answering that particular question. So first, I'd like to again echo Hingman's thanks to the CIC and especially to Pablo for this kind invitation to participate in this exchange. I'm speaking today from Vancouver, which is the traditional and unceded and ancestral territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, and I'm very grateful to be here to speak to you from Vancouver. Now, my own journey over 15 years in terms of completing 3 graduate degrees was far from straightforward. So there'll be no surefire recipes for thriving and surviving grad school for me, I'm afraid, but I do hope that sharing some of the things that I stumbled upon may help others that are also thinking about graduate school. And as Linda mentioned, I think it's a really interesting time to be thinking about this question and thinking about higher education. And my personal belief system really views education as a right, but I think as history teaches us, education systems themselves are tools that can be used for privilege and a lever through which we gain power and influence. And at times, these tools can be, blunt and benign, but at other times, it can be quite pointed if Canada's history with residential schools serves as any indication. So I think, you know, collectively, all of us on this call today are a fairly critically engaged and educated audience, and therefore somewhat a privileged audience. So my hope really in sharing some of my personal journey is that our discussion leaves you with a widened sense of curiosity about the values and the why questions that are prompting your interest in pursuing graduate school. That real sort of introspection on the why question is something that I felt I didn't really receive much guidance on. And so really a lot of my remarks are framed around prompting those why questions among this really wonderful audience that we have with us today. So to come back to your question, you know, at what point did I really consider pursuing graduate studies? And unlike Hingman, I fell into graduate school quite quickly after my undergrad. And well, you know, I can't really point to a specific moment when I decided to go to grad school. I was raised by my mother, who's a university professor and a single parent, who in the course of my upbringing moved me and my siblings across 3 continents. And my mother's story is brimming with the kinds of hardships that are born out of the necessity to overcome sexism, racism, and a whole other host of injustices. And through it all, even as a young child, I knew it was her education, a PhD in Commonwealth literature with a specialization in Nigerian playwrights. You can't get more obscure than that, particularly in the 1970s when she did her PhD. But it was that sort of access to education that provided her with a sense of independence and agency to overcome these hardships. So education in this sense too can be really powerful, and this was something that was really palpable to me at a young age, was that if I was to do justice to my mother's journey and the sacrifices she made, I would need to go at least as far as her, educationally speaking. So I was really raised with education as a value and a pathway to overcoming hardship. And so when I finished up my undergrad, half a year early, you know, gap year was just not on the cards for me. I had to either be working or be in school. And at that juncture, I was offered a 6-month paid internship with the UN Environment Program in Paris, and I jumped at the opportunity. And in the space of those 6 months, I realized my heart was not invested in going to law school as I'd intended. And there are many students that I've spoken to over the years that have their hearts set on a particular trajectory, and then life throws you a curveball and you do something completely different, and that's okay. And so after that internship, I was offered in quick succession a job with an environmental consultancy based in France, and then with a rights-based NGO in London. And so instead of law school, I knew I had to do some kind of graduate school. I enrolled in a master's in conflict analysis and management at Royal Roads with a specialization in political, ethnic, and security issues. And it was a brand new program, and there was a lot of growing pains, both for faculty and students to work out. And I was one of the only 2 students that actually entered that program fairly quickly after undergrad. But overall, though, for me at the time, it was an excellent fit because the program offered an intensive residency program every summer. And the rest of it was distance-based online learning, which allowed me to remain in the UK while pursuing a Canadian degree. And to really dive into that practical experience that internship with UNEP really whetted my appetite for, and that I was excited for. And frankly, I've never regretted that choice between, you know, choosing a professional master's program versus law school. And my NGO work in that early phase of my career took me to about 15 countries in 4 years in my mid-20s. And as an early career policy professional working on sustainable development, that was an invaluable time. And I think looking back, it certainly paved the way for all of the work that followed for me in the field of sustainable development in the decade or so that followed. So I'll leave it there.
What a fascinating trajectory. Thank you so much, Priya. I believe the next question could be a fascinating, an equally fascinating opportunity. This is something that's been on my mind as an undergraduate student and on the minds of a lot of my colleagues and friends. Essentially, where to go, what to choose. You sort of touched on that, Priya. What factors, and this is of course a question to the wider panel, what factors just helped you decide which graduate program to attend or to pursue? Was it, location, research strengths of the institution, reputation? How much did funding go into the calculation? If Ali, what do you think about this?
Sure. Yeah. No, I'm happy to talk about this. So, in my case, I came out of an undergrad at Queen's University in global development, and I wasn't really sure what to do. On my end, I had some professors saying, do law school, and some professors saying, do a master's program. And so at that stage, I cast a wide net. I applied to a bunch of law schools in Ontario and in BC. I applied to a bunch of master's programs, including Monk, GISPIA, and NIPSIA. And it wasn't until that stage when I actually encountered the dual degree programs and the different options that were out there. Some of the things I was considering was the JD MGA dual program at U of T and the JD MA program at U-Ottawa Law and the Norman Paterson School. I knew I wanted to do something in international law and foreign policy and multilateral negotiations, but I wasn't exactly sure where. And so in that calculus, I was looking at all the prospectuses, I was looking at all the law schools, and what it really came down to, after all the applications was, what kind of experiences do I want? What do I really want to do during my my graduate school that I wouldn't get to do in other places? And I would say that one of the things that drew me to Ottawa, to U-Ottawa, and to Carleton U was, proximity to all these incredible opportunities. During law school and during my grad school program, I had the opportunity to complete placements with different federal departments. In one, I remember I was doing one class on trade negotiations in my master's program, and the summer after that, I was doing a co-op at Global Affairs in the Trade Negotiations Division. And then at law school, only a couple of years later, I was doing a course on advanced international law. And then, through the school, which had a really good relationship with different departments, I was working on, treaty law at Global Affairs, working on different treaty negotiations there as well. And so I'd say that, for me, it came down to where could I get really good opportunities? Where could I learn from incredible professors? And I would say funding definitely played into it. Through the JDMA program and through all these different applications, I did compare the funding packages. And so I'd say, it was a combination of things. U-Ottawa and Carleton did offer the most in terms of scholarships, but it also came down ultimately to the types of experiences I wanted in law school and in grad school to build my expertise and experience in foreign policy and international affairs.
Very interesting, and I imagine many people can relate to various parts of that. Michael, how did you come to choose the University of Toronto for your studies? What went into that decision?
Yeah, sure. I can certainly speak to that. Then I want to start off by saying thanks, Pablo, for moderating this, and thanks to the CIC for putting this together and having us here. I really appreciate it, and I think this is going to be a very good discussion. So in terms of my decision to go to U of T and to study at the Monk School, a few things factored into that. One being that I had studied at Carleton doing political science for my undergraduate degree, and I'm from Ottawa, so the idea of a change of scenery at that point for grad school sounded pretty attractive to me, and particularly in Toronto. The other thing was that I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to get into in the workforce, but I was pretty confident that I did not want to pursue further academia after doing grad school. I wanted to get into the workforce after grad school, but my interests were still a little bit general. So the fact that the Monk School bills itself as a professional program was certainly attractive to me, but then also the fact that, I felt like maybe I wanted to get into government, but I didn't really know exactly what was out there in the private sector yet. So the fact that Toronto has both government opportunities and private sector opportunities was something that drew me to study in Toronto. And then a few things that are particular to the MGA program were pretty attractive as well. The internship component in the summer, it's a mandatory component, or at least it was when I studied there. That was a pretty big selling point for me. You're encouraged to do your internship abroad as well, and there's funding for that. So that was a very nice perk. And then also the capstone, given that I wanted to, again, get into the workforce right after. Rather than doing a thesis as your kind of culminating project, which you can do, there's the option to do that at the Monk School, but doing a capstone program, which is, for those who aren't familiar with capstone programs, it's essentially a consulting program where you work in a small team and you have to tackle kind of a broad problem and come up with a solution for your client, which I know some schools do kind of simulations for that, where you'll have a professor or a group of professors standing in as the client. One of the things that I really liked about the Monk School was that you have real world clients. So I got to work with Export Development Canada. And so we worked with, we got to present to their head economist and a few other people who headed up certain areas that were relevant to the project at Export Development Canada. And we stayed in touch with some more junior professionals at Export Development Canada throughout the course of the project. So that was really interesting to me. So yeah, for me, it was really a variety of reasons for why I chose the Monk School, but certainly weighed them all against a lot of other factors. I was looking at schools in Ottawa as well, obviously Nipsia and Jispia. So it really came down to the environment in Toronto, and then also those components of the program that I mentioned.
Toronto is definitely nothing to sneeze at. A great city, I hear to study, and I have yet to study there. Might be an option. It might be an option for many attending tonight. Hingman, I believe that your path could be an interesting insight into this question. Do you have any thoughts on what factors contributed to your decision to study at Royal Roads?
I do, and thanks for tagging me on this one. Like I mentioned before, my undergrad and work experience was kind of a mix of specialist in that I worked in the waste sector, but also generalist in that I have a general environmental studies background and sustainability background. And so when it came time to think about what I needed to add to my arsenal of experiences, I thought about what kind of skills do I need to add in terms of looking for future work. And the way that I went about doing this was also because I was already working at the time and I was hiring in students too. So I gained some valuable views from what it's like for employers to look at CVs and to look at applications over and over again. And to understand, okay, what are they looking at the schools that you're going to? Are they looking at your degree? What is it that people are looking for? And so for me, it was important when I went to choose my grad school, it was important to me to have practical experience, and it was important that I could keep working while I was doing school. And so the program that I chose was also a generalist program. I went to Royal Roads University and did my master's on intercultural and international communications. And so for me, it was thinking about what is the story I'm trying to tell about my life when I'm trying to pitch myself to potential employers. And so that meant I started off with a science and sustainability background, gained experience in that, became a specialist, and then expanding the door into communications and how to bridge different policies, for example, or bridge ways of thinking, because in the work that I was doing at the time, it was a lot of trying to get different people from different backgrounds, no matter if we're talking about culture or if we're talking about experience, or say they're a scientist versus a policymaker. It was important to me to be able to speak to all of the different experiences, and so that's why I chose a communications degree and a degree where I could keep working and keep gaining experiences.
No, that's very interesting. That of thinking about the personal narrative that you would like to build on through graduate studies. That's fascinating. Thank you so much, Hingman. Priya, I believe you also have some important insights on this question.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd really like to pick up on something that both Hingman and Michael noted. So obviously one sort of way to weigh up your options is looking at a professional master's versus a research master's. That's a really important set of factors to consider, and then the second part of that that Hingman mentioned is, you know, whether you want to be a generalist or a specialist. And I think that's a good 4x4 matrix to kind of give you some options when you're trying to weigh up different schools. And I can just share how some of that played out for me. So I finished my master's. My research was very practical project looking at coltan mining in the Democratic Republic of Congo in the early 2000s. And it was when, you know, blood diamond was a big deal. Probably a lot of the younger millennials won't know what I'm talking about, but it was a famous Leonardo DiCaprio movie. And it was, you know, a lot of questions around supply chains and how do we deal with the trade in conflict goods, you know, particularly when it's fueling really mass violence. And how do we engage both the public sector and private sector to work together on these types of topics? And so from my perspective, this was a project that very squarely spoke to a lot of big debates in political science. And so when I applied for my PhD in political science, and I was given a really excellent offer from UBC and decided to come back to UBC, even though I already had a degree from there, there were lots of, you know, other factors pulling me back to UBC. Funding, of course, was one of those things. I was initially offered direct entry into the PhD program, and my funding package was designed according to that. But once I got here, after I started the first couple of weeks in the program, the graduate program director said, "Hey, we were just looking at your profile, and actually your master's from Royal Roads isn't a master's in political science, even though it was political, ethnic, and security studies, because it wasn't a research-based master's. It wasn't sort of considered equivalent to a master's in political science." And so that added a year of coursework to my PhD trajectory. So this distinction between, you know, you can be undecided on whether you'd like to pursue a more professional track or a more research track, but just be aware that sometimes those choices will then impact if you do decide to come back into academia. Now, my reasons for taking up a PhD weren't really about becoming a full-time academic. It was really about elevating the degree of rigor and research methods that I could bring to very policy-oriented research projects and programs, because in my experience, particularly working for an international rights-based NGO, we were very reactive to things that were happening in the human rights space, but we didn't really have the luxury of designing, you know, robust, socially scientifically robust research programs. A lot of it was kind of a name and shame type research strategy, and that didn't sit well with me, particularly when you're having really serious policy discussions with both the public sector and private sector partners. So there's this sort of sense for me at the time that NGOs really needed to raise their research game, and that's really what drew me to the PhD program. But certainly that made for a very lonely trajectory in the PhD program, because a lot of my peers were really focused on landing that tenure track position after. So I think this question around navigating research-based versus professional-based programs is a really important question for folks to think about. And it's difficult because you don't know, you know, you may not know which path is for you. But certainly in my experience, those choices do have some knock-on impacts down the road.
Absolutely. It seems to me like really thinking about it and thinking ahead is a common theme across all of these. Priya, thank you so much. This next question is very interesting. It's definitely one that many people look forward to when it comes to these types of panels and events. I'm actually going to call on Lauren because I believe that she has something to add to this. Lauren, what advice do you wish you had before starting graduate school, or even while completing graduate school? What do you wish somebody in a panel, for example, had told you before that?
Pablo, that's a great question. First, I just want to take a minute and maybe introduce myself and recognize the unceded and unsurrendered Abenaki Algonquin territory that I'm joining from tonight. And those of us in Ottawa are also all so lucky to be joining from. And so kind of a little bit about myself, and that shapes kind of the advice I wish I had, was before I showed up to work at Global Affairs, I really didn't have a plan to do a master's. So I had finished my undergrad and I was very set on, I'm going to take a year off. I'm not going to go to grad school. And then I tried that for 2 or 3 months and realized that was a bad decision, and that I really wanted to be back in school. And so I didn't apply to grad school until July of the summer going into the cohort I wanted to start in. So I was kind of frantically calling grad schools around the country saying, hey, can I start in September? And, you know, a lot of the schools laughed at me and said, that's crazy. But I applied anyway, and I ended up getting into a few programs and choosing the University of Ottawa for a number of different reasons, mostly for kind of like some of the job opportunities that I thought living in Ottawa would provide me. But I guess so the biggest thing that I wish I knew before I started grad school was that nobody is going to show up on the first day and know exactly what they're doing. And so it's okay if you feel really overwhelmed, and it's okay to show up and change your mind. Because having applied so late in the game, I thought that I had to, like, you know, show up on the first day in September and have a full research proposal ready to go, and know exactly what I was doing. I think the other thing too, and this is less from my experience, but more through friends I made through grad school, if you're an international student and you're looking at programs and you're really interested in the co-ops or the exchanges or kind of some of the embassy opportunities that they have, ask a lot of questions about who those opportunities are open to, because sometimes the schools have different regulations in terms of who can participate. And you don't want to make a decision on a program based on one piece of the puzzle if it's not fully accessible. And I know going through my grad program, it was a wonderful program that had a number of great exchange programs or co-ops, but unfortunately they weren't accessible to everybody based on being an international student or different factors. And so I think knowing that in advance is really, really helpful. And then once I showed up in grad school, I think knowing that everybody was overwhelmed and finding a few friends to kind of like share that with was, because it's easy to go to class and think that everybody, based on how prepared everybody seems, that everybody's feeling a little bit overwhelmed. If you don't do all the readings, you're not the only person in the room who maybe missed one, and that's okay. And it's okay to have a life outside of grad school. So I worked full-time and went to school full-time, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend, but having kind of some activities outside of my school life to balance, and like meeting people who were thinking about things beyond just the readings that we were doing in grad school was really helpful for kind of having, especially when you're talking about policy, having a more well-rounded kind of understanding of the conversation.
Absolutely. Like in all things, balance in grad school. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Lauren. Michael, what advice do you wish you had been given before starting at U of T?
I think one of the things, and this might take away some of the romanticization of graduate school that I know I had before entering, and I think some others may have as well, is do as much financial planning as you can beforehand. If you are self-financing your degree, it can be a huge investment. So just know kind of what you're getting yourself into. Look at, you know, what the actual tuition is going to cost, and look at, you know, what if you're not going to work during the 1 or 2 years or however many years you're going to be in grad school for, then look into, you know, what the cost might be of not having an income during that time, and just plan accordingly. If that means, you know, looking for as many scholarships as you can, that's great. If that means, you know, delaying by a year or considering doing degrees that are maybe have lower tuition, I think that's also an important consideration. But I think just, planning as much as possible is very important, and it's something that I wish I would have been told a couple years in advance of grad school. In terms of good things to know for when you're actually going through grad school, I know for me, a really exciting thing was some of the extracurriculars that are available. You can get involved in a lot, especially with some of these programs like the MGA, or I know NIPSIA is like this too, where you have a cohort of 80 to 100 people. So there are often a lot of groups that pop up or activities that you can get involved in that are either related to your studies or unrelated and more of a social kind of activity. Great to get involved in those, but also don't overdo it to the point where you're burning yourself out because you're trying to get involved in so many of these things while also taking on your studies, which can obviously be pretty hectic at times. So, and along that same vein, excuse me, just taking time to relax. And, there's nothing wrong with taking a night off from studying and recharging. And, I think especially if you're going to go into the workforce after your degree, it's really good to enjoy the fact that, you can go out with a few friends on a Wednesday, which is not something that you can do after that as often once you're in a job from Monday to Friday. So yeah, I think relaxing and taking the time to really make sure that you get some time off during your studies is important.
Absolutely. Reminds me of a saying that I learned from a meme. Take it easy, but take it nonetheless. And I think it's very well reflected. Thank you so much, Michael. I'm also I'm just overly eager. I'm particularly interested by all of these questions. Let's get Priya in, because I want to know if, first of all, if it's okay to have your career goals evolve or change as you were pursuing your graduate study. Your graduate studies. Did that happen to you, Priya? And if so, why do you think that is, and how did you manage that?
Yeah, thank you for that really great question. I think certainly, like Lauren said, I was one of those people that came into the PhD program particularly feeling, very much that imposter syndrome. And I can't say it's entirely left, even now that I've finished. But I think, I always knew I wanted to work in the world of policy. And so I always had one foot in the world of work. So while I was doing my first master's at Royal Roads, I was working with that international rights-based organization. A year into the PhD program, I worked for the global trade union movement, stewarding a network of trade union pension trustees to integrate environmental, social, and governance factors into investment decision-making, with a particular focus on labor and human rights. And so I was one of those people that was a really reluctant academic. So in that sense, I don't think my career goals really evolved or changed, but I think I wish I'd paid more attention to what I wanted out of the PhD program while I was going through it. I think, there's a really high degree of peer pressure in competitive schools. I think particularly PhD programs attract a lot of A-type personalities. And so sometimes that sort of, we were a very collaborative cohort and peer group, but there is this sort of underlying sense of competitiveness, who's getting the big shirk as opposed to the small shirk, or, there's all kinds of ways in which competition is sort of wired into PhD programs. But I think what was really clear for me, what was clarifying going through the PhD program, is I was really clear I did not want to teach. I had that instinct about it when I started the PhD program, but then, part of your funding is through TA-ships, and I loved my students, but I was a terrible teacher. My evaluations were fine, but I just knew for me it wasn't the thing that was going to be my calling. I really believe teachers are born and not made. And so I had that opportunity to really figure out what I didn't want to do. So that was really clarifying. And I will say that I think PhD programs in general, particularly in the social sciences, I think this is very different in business schools, very different in applied sciences, but the social sciences in particular, which most of your audience will be interested in, IR or poli-sci kind of degrees, PhD programs are not geared towards supporting graduate students who are interested in non-academic career paths. I think the average tenure track professor is not actively engaged in policy work outside the university and outside of academic research can't really speak to the experience and job markets that are outside that wheelhouse. And so PhDs like me that do move on to places like large development banks or the Foreign Service in large part have to figure it out on their own. And that's not a criticism, it's an observation. And so for instance, because I had one foot in the world of work in the responsible investment space, I would attend the UN Principles for Responsible Investment conference every year. I, presented at a number of those conferences, and none of my travel to those conferences was covered through the departmental travel stipend. But if I were to present that exact same paper in an academic conference, that would be covered. And that goes to Michael's point about thinking about, some of the financial implications of being able to fund your graduate work. And I think, even though the former conference was much more important for my career trajectory in terms of networking with people that are working on topics that I'm really interested in, the department was really focused on how to prep grad students for the academic job market, how to give a great deal of guidance on how to get into top tier journals, how to do a job talk, how to build a teaching portfolio, and a publication record, but none of those things were really helping me with kind of where I wanted to go. So I was really enjoying that, the rigor that the PhD program was giving me, but sort of in a professional development sense, felt quite let down by the program. And it's really, their tools were not really geared towards a career progression with organizations like the OECD or UN agencies or the World Bank. So I think particularly when universities are looking out at how few of their PhDs are getting tenure track positions because of the way the university landscape is changing, I think PhD programs, unlike sort of master's programs, are starting to rethink how they're preparing PhDs to go into non-academic careers. But I mean, I'm guessing that, this group is sort of quite niche. There's not that many people that would want to do a PhD that then don't want to get into academia, but we do exist. And I think the reality of the job market is going to force a lot of graduate departments to rethink the support they're offering students. So I think for those that are interested in going through a research master's as a stepping stone to a PhD, it's very, very important to ask your graduate program director what supports they have in place for students that are also interested in non-academic career tracks.
Absolutely, thank you, Priya. I do hear that the academic job market is tough. Many others are, of course, but I have been hearing from many professors and associate professors and contract instructors on Twitter, which is actually a huge source for me, for better or for worse, that it does seem to be the case. A very important consideration. Michael, I'm interested. You mentioned the public-private sector divide in your decision to study in Toronto specifically. How did your career goals evolve when you were studying in such a private sector city, let's say, like Toronto, and at the University of Toronto?
Yeah, I think that's a good characterization of Toronto, particularly in comparison to Ottawa, which is where I was coming from. In Ottawa, I think can definitely be considered a government city. So government was sort of what I had my eye on. I wasn't set on that. I did want to explore the job market in the private sector a little bit, but when I went to do my graduate studies, I kind of assumed that I would end up getting into a role in government or politics after graduating. But I mean, just being in Toronto and being in a program that is fairly generalist, at Monk, they really do try and expose you to a lot of different career paths. There are a lot of generalist students who take the program, myself being one of them. So that allowed me to kind of become exposed to a few other fields. One that I kind of really stuck with was global capital markets, and that flowed out of an interest in global political economy coming out of my undergraduate degree. And then, you know, through my internship program, I focused a little bit more on business. I was at the Thai Canadian Chamber of Commerce in Thailand, so that gave me a lot more exposure to that world. But yeah, just being in Toronto and being around the private sector a little bit more was a big eye opener. I mean, I never really thought that there were roles at banks that were suited to people with a background like mine. So that was interesting. I certainly never pictured myself working at a bank, but yeah, today, I mean, I'm working at RBC, and I know upwards of 15 people who came out of the same program as me, who work at RBC as well, and I know several others who work at other banks. There are a lot of roles that are well suited to people with international relations backgrounds, who have more, you know, qualitative educational backgrounds, whereas I had kind of thought that banking was for people with more quantitative backgrounds. So yeah, just kind of getting that exposure to different aspects, different avenues in the workforce was something that kind of veered me off of the path that I sort of thought I would be on after graduating.
That's very interesting. I grew up in Ottawa for the past 10 years or so. So government was and perhaps still is the main target of mine. And I'm sure that this applies to other attendees tonight. Definitely important to check out other sectors. Thank you so much, Michael. And of course, this brings us to a discussion about the roles that we currently occupy, that you currently occupy as panelists. Hingman, how did you end up working with the International Development Research Center as a policy and strategy analyst? And would you have any career advice for those attending tonight?
Thanks so much for that question. So how did I end up at the International Development Research Center? Like I mentioned before, I was kind of working and doing a graduate degree, my master's at the same time, just like Lauren. And through that experience, okay, I'm still there. Okay, sorry.
Yes, indeed.
My computer did something funny. So when I was working at Environment and Climate Change Canada on the international file, was working on Canada's commitment to provide funding for international for developing partners to address climate change and in terms of climate mitigation and climate adaptation. And so through that experience, it made me really think about the concept of development in terms of what it's all about, what Canada's role is, and why things are the way they are in terms of you know, assistance and official assistance to developing countries through different platforms. So at that point, I had already decided that I wanted to work to get more into international development, because I was working with a lot of developing partners in the international file. And at the time I was doing my master's at the same time, gaining more experiences in intercultural communications, which is needed a lot when you work with different partners, especially internationally. And that's when I started looking at available opportunities in Canada first, because I wanted to stay in Canada for now. And who is the biggest funder of international development in Canada? It's the International Development Research Center. It's a Crown Corporation, which means it's kind of not really part of the government. It's funded by the government. And still reports to the Minister of International Development, but has one foot out. And so there was an opening, I applied, and it's as simple as that, but not really. There was a lot of networking involved, which I would tell everyone to do. That's a huge piece of advice that I received from my mentors. having a master's degree, having education is an important element. Having a good series of experiences that you can talk about and a good way to sell yourself and to tell your story is important. But equally important is the personal relationships that you have with other people, no matter if they're at the same level as you, at a lower level as you, or at a higher level, because those people will continue to progress in their careers. And you know, I'm actually quite introverted, and I used to say to people that I hate networking, and it would make my skin crawl literally to have to go into a situation where I had to network with people and give out my business card. But then when I started looking at networking as a way to build personal relationships, and connect to people genuinely, and be led by curiosity, led by, you know, what really connects me to these people, it became easier. And so you know, highly recommended that everyone networks. And I mean, I think we'll probably talk about it a little bit more today, but in the context of the pandemic, it's really hard to network in the way that we used to. And so now I think we're all going to struggle with how do we do that? How do we network in this situation? And again, I would think about building personal relationships and how that happens virtually.
Absolutely. Mentorship is fundamental. And I think many of your fellow panelists would agree. Ali, how did you end up in, well, thank you, Hingman. And I believe this could be complemented by Ali. How did you end up in your current role? And what would be some career advice that you could share with the attendees?
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, Pablo, I wouldn't say that it was, you know, it was an intentional career path. I think what you do in grad school and when you're applying is you cast a wide net and you see what happens. And so I guess a little bit about myself. So I over the course of grad school, law school, and the master's, I did a couple placements at Global Affairs. At the same time, on the law side, I summered and articled and did some work in private practice, working in international and corporate commercial law. And then from there, at the same time, I was applying to different things. I wasn't sure whether I wanted to do private practice. And so I applied to something called the Recruitment of Policy Leaders Program, which is the Government of Canada's flagship recruitment tool for mid to senior level folks who have, you know, either a master's or a law degree or a PhD. And so what I did was, you know, while I was completing my work, while I was getting this kind of experience, I applied, and you know, that was a process, and government processes do take long, but that process came through a year later, and I found out that I got into this program, and essentially it was a one-time opportunity to join the federal government at a senior level, where they matched people to teams and units based on your interest and experience. And so while I was searching for a position to land in through the RPL program, I went back to Global Affairs. I worked in Arctic law. You know, I like Hingman said, I networked widely. I got to get a better sense of who does what. And one of the guiding things for me was that I wanted to use my background in international law and foreign policy to do multilateral negotiations. A large part of the coursework was on negotiation theory, on how international agreements work, international treaties. And so through the networking, I basically ended up meeting a manager and a team that was helping to launch the Global Partnership on AI, which is an international multi-stakeholder body that Prime Minister Trudeau announced back in 2018 at the G7 summit. And essentially, you know, the team that hired me was looking for someone with that kind of background, with an international law background, with a foreign policy background, someone who had experience in multilateral negotiations to help get this off the ground. And so I would say that it wasn't a direct career path. You have to be open to new opportunities. I'm not someone who has a background in AI, but they were really looking for people with transferable skills to help build the infrastructure for this international organization that we ended up launching, you know, this past June with 15 founding countries. And so it's about taking that kind of experience, taking those interests, and really seeing what's out there, networking, and maybe you'll land up doing something that you wouldn't expect to do otherwise. I mean, I never saw myself when I started the program back in 2014 that I would be working in AI.
Most definitely, keeping an open mind, something that seems to be a boon for whoever adopts that mindset. Ali, thank you so much. Lauren, how did you end up working with the Afghanistan desk at Global Affairs Canada, and what advice would you be able to provide?
I think it's going to be pretty similar to a lot of people. Networking was really central to how I ended up where I am. So when I was going to school, I nannied full-time and I worked as a research assistant part-time, working on track 2 diplomacy with a professor. And so that really opened my eyes to like a whole world that I didn't even know existed. I knew that I was really interested in international relations, and I did a lot of research on peacekeeping and feminist approaches to foreign policy from like a peacekeeping perspective. And I thought maybe I would try to work at GAC on some of those things with the announcement of a feminist international foreign policy. And then I started working with this professor who worked on track 2 diplomacy. And she's like, oh, this is a whole different kind of world, way of operating. And I was thrilled to be working there. But then, as my studies went on, I couldn't be a research assistant forever. So I, was networking the whole time, and then got my foot in the door at Global Affairs working on food security, which was, really interesting. But I worked with a team that did a lot of agriculture policy, which was, again, very interesting, but not necessarily, I wasn't getting the same kind of engagement or interest at a personal level that I had when I was working on some of these kind of track 2 diplomacy issues or peacekeeping issues that I had engaged in when I was in school. So I started reaching out across the department, and through connections that I had made with my graduate program, I was connected with somebody who was looking for a student on the Afghanistan team. And I was still in school working on my research paper, my major research paper. So I was able to join them as a student for quite a while. So about a year, I worked with them as a student. And then once I finished my degree, I transitioned into a full-time role, taking over our health programming.
Absolutely. Very, very varied approach. And Global Affairs Canada is an exciting place to work, I hear. That's excellent. I do believe, thank you, Lauren. Sorry, I hold the thought in my head and I forget to vocalize it. I do believe that we've reached the end of the moderated section of our panel. So I have the pleasure of turning the floor over to questions directly from the audience, either on Slido or on the Q&A function here on Zoom. So if you do have a question, please submit it through one of these channels. For those in Zoom, feel free to use the Q&A function. We actually did receive one from a very eager attendee some days ago on a transition from journalism, from her career in journalism due to the worrying state of the industry, into perhaps studying international affairs and using narrative tools and narrative to their advantage. And of course, while working in the field of international affairs. Hingman, I believe you mentioned narrative already. So, what advice do you have to this particular attendee?
Thanks so much, Pablo, and thank you for the question. I have a number of friends who are going through the same situation, and I definitely feel for you. A little bit of context about me: after doing my master's, because my master's was in communications, I was actually able to do a documentary as part of my dissemination of my research. And through that process, I started understanding this field that is called knowledge translation and knowledge mobilization. And it's a field that's more popular in health research. but now starting to become more used in international development and in a lot of other research fields as well. And so this is what I would suggest is to someone with strong background in journalism and strong background in communications. If you're interested in working in international development, it would be worth looking into the field of knowledge mobilization or knowledge translation, because the skills are quite transferable. I personally am also pursuing more education on that as well. There are graduate certificates, for example, from the University of Guelph. It's just 3 courses to take you through kind of a certificate program. And it's a really great way of pulling together communication skills and the journalistic pursuit, but specifically for engaging with policymakers and influencing decision making. And so I think of it as engagement and outreach for the purpose of linking research into practice and influencing behavior change. And so it's a practical application of the skills that you would already have from journalism.
That is fascinating. Could you repeat just to make sure that the questioner got it, what certificate or avenue that was, Hingman?
It's the graduate certificate in knowledge mobilization. It's from the University of Guelph.
That sounds very interesting. Thank you so much. We have a very good question here that I believe was added. How does one plan, or how would you plan for applications and studies in a graduate school along this disrupted arc, along this disrupted timeline, this COVID-19 timeline? How have you learned in your experiences to manage disruptions to, the master plan that you might have made in years previous? And did you learn any tips over the past couple of months about how to manage disruptions? I think it's a question on many people's minds. You know what? Just please jump in. I'm not sure who to ask. I don't want to put anybody on the spot here.
I'm happy to jump in, Pablo.
Yes, Priya.
So, I really think in this COVID context, students have a lot more at stake. I mean, we're really looking ahead to a tanking global economy by many measures, and that's likely going to have tremendous impact on the job market in the months and years ahead. So it's really, really important to do your homework. As sort of a closing recommendation, I really encourage folks to watch the economist Scott Galloway's interview with Christian Amanpour on PBS recently, where he's talking about how universities are really going to become the walking dead in the COVID-19 epidemic. And it's quite a stark economist perspective on why that is. And just by way of context, Galloway is a former Silicon Valley runaway who's now a professor of marketing at NYU Stern School of Business. And he really believes that a North American post-pandemic future will entail really interesting partnerships between the largest tech companies globally and elite universities. And I think Galloway's points are really important for students considering grad school, because you have to try to start to look at where some of the headwinds are in how the global world of work and equally the world of education is going to change. So what do partnerships between global tech companies and university mean for the education landscape and choosing a grad school? Well, I think according to Galloway, a lot of these partnerships are going to allow universities to expand enrollment exponentially through hybrid online offline degrees. So a lot of us talked about experiential value in that grad school trajectory, and it's likely that trends are showing students are going to really be able to benefit from these online offline hybrid programs with some game-changing impacts for affordability and value. But he also predicts hundreds, if not thousands, of sort of mid-tier universities, particularly in the States, maybe less so in Canada, are really going to go out of business because, and the ones that remain, the really elite universities, the Harvards, the Yales, the Ivies, you know, are going to be really primarily for the children of the 1%. Because if you look at the value proposition of luxury universities, you know, those are not really inclusive value propositions from an economic lens. So should you be one of these students that's really chasing an elite grad school experience, your peers are going to be the 1%. So what does that mean for considerations of rising income inequality, for how we're going to tackle climate change? You know, what does that mean for your learning cohort? I think these are equally important questions. You know, we're looking at university rankings as a big metric for why we choose a school, but think about your peer group as well, because your peer group really influences how you're going to learn, and the composition of that peer group is going to dramatically change in a COVID context. So I think, you know, these partnerships are going to really accelerate access to quality education for many, but it's also fundamentally disrupting a model of education that's built on face-to-face pedagogy, right? So students looking ahead to grad school are also going to be co-designing, co-learning, co-experimenting with faculty and administrators who themselves really don't know a lot. You know, I mean, like some people are really adjusting very well to online delivery, but a lot of faculty are not. You know, I mean, I've heard through the grapevine faculty are griping about how they're going to pay for a new ergonomic chair to be able to, you know, teach students from home. So people are coming into the education landscape, particularly in graduate programs, with sort of very vastly different top of mind problems that just simply didn't exist, you know, a couple of months ago. So, you know, I think a lot of Galloway's predictions are going to be tested very soon, and many of you considering grad school are going to be sort of the veritable guinea pigs, and I'm very sorry to say that I don't envy you. But in this time of great experimentation and a new normal, I'd really sort of come back to some of my earlier comments at the start of the call, which is, you know, I think whatever decision you make will be the right decision if it's really coming from a place of self-introspection. So you really have to know yourself, your limits, your capabilities, your wants, to get the most out of this grad school experience in a time of great uncertainty. And I'll leave it there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Very interesting insights, Priya. Thank you so much. We have a lot of questions coming in from attendees. Most popular one by far seems to be about law school. Ali, I think this question may be for you.
Sure. Yeah. No, I'm happy to take it. Yeah. So,
absolutely.
I mean, so if I'm being completely candid, I didn't really know about the JDMA program until I was, you know, looking through the different websites. And so I found it and I said, this is fantastic. I can't decide what to do, so why not both? But I'd say, I'll give a little bit of advice that I also give to Pablo, who happens to be one of my mentees through the CIC mentorship program, is that do your research. Really do your research when you're applying for schools. Look 2 or 3 years out. Make sure that you are looking for all the prerequisites, all the different things you have to do. For me, I had to make sure that I did the LSAT early enough that if I had to, I could rewrite the LSAT if I didn't get a score that was competitive enough. And then for the master's programs, I found that, you know, Monk and NIPSIA and others also required mandatory courses in micro and macroeconomics. And, you know, I didn't do my research well early enough. And so I ended up doing both courses in my last semester, cramming it in to make sure that I would be eligible to get in. And that's a mistake that I would recommend that you know, attendees don't repeat, is, you know, do your research, get to know the prerequisites, make sure that you complete them well in advance so you're not rushing. But
particularly, sorry, Ali, just to make sure, particularly the question also includes a component about what advantage law school gave you in the field of international affairs.
Exactly, yeah. So I mean, so I'd say, you know, one of the biggest things that the JDMA program offered was the ability to learn about international law, international negotiations, how states contract to do things, you know, state responsibility for, you know, for their obligations. And it was fantastic because I was able to take courses in international law in both schools, from the master's and then in the law school. And it was incredible because it really gave you an opportunity to learn about how, state-to-state relations play in, to foreign policies, the way things work, to geopolitics. And through that program, I had the opportunity to get experience, understanding how treaty law works. I had the experience to represent Canada at the Arctic 5 meetings, where we negotiated ways to work together with Russia, U.S., and all the other Arctic countries on ways to safeguard the Arctic environment. And then in the context of AI, I was able to use those skills and use the background in international law and foreign policy and negotiations to negotiate an MOU and the terms of reference for how the global partnership on AI would be structured. So I'd say that what law school really adds is it gives you the hard background on how state-to-state relations work, state-to-state obligations, state-to-state contracts. But it also gives you soft skills in terms of really being able to hone your written and oral advocacy. And those kind of skills you'll use in your day-to-day when you're briefing senior officials, but you'll also use that when you're speaking with your foreign counterparts and with your international partners to convey Canada's position, Canada's red lines, and really get your point across in a good way. So that's what I would say is the value add. It's a very good program. I would highly recommend it. In my class, I think there was about 13, 14. So there's not many, but it's a good program to consider if you want to build those skills and that kind of stuff. But I would say that it was a 4-year program, and so those are, and like Michael mentioned, you have to take into account finances. It's a law degree on top of a master's. Sometimes, not always, but the master's is paid for, which is nice. But you do have to consider those things.
Fascinating. Law school, I'm sure, is on a lot of people's minds, and it's great to have those insights from you, Ali. Thank you. We also received a lot of variations of the same question, including the school itself, the importance of which school you attend and also which degree you attend. For example, Ruth Tekadi asks, do employers give more attention to the school you did your master's in or the degree in and of itself? Is name recognition really that important? And in a similar vein, Francis Finlayson asks, I'm leaning towards applying for NIPSIA, but have an offer from a lesser known school in the US. Do the panelists know any of the benefits of studying abroad that can outweigh the name recognition of a school such as NIPSIA? So a lot of questions about name recognition and the difference between recognition of the program and, of course, the school. Any thoughts on that for our panelists?
I'll come in first. I did mention that a little bit in my remarks about when I started thinking from the perspective of the employer. And so I can speak from my experience hiring from Environment and Climate Change Canada, which is a federal department, as well as the International Development Research Center. And I hate to say it, but people do pay attention to the name of the school and to if it is on your application. However, that is starting to change when we're having more conversations about diversity and inclusion and equity in hiring processes. We are starting to talk about how do we look at applications without those elements where, and I think Priya mentioned it a little bit earlier, in this day and age, and increasingly so, inequity is going to be a huge impact or have a huge impact on the ability of people to get the education that they want. And should that be a factor in who we choose to work in our organizations? And I think the conversations around that are starting to look at how do we work around that? How do we work around our unconscious biases around, are we paying attention to the name of the school? What if we don't look at it in applications? And so even though I think in my experience, I've heard of colleagues who say, oh, this person went to this school, so they must be good. even though I've heard that, I think it's starting to change, and as people are starting to have more conversations broadly about equity and inclusion, my hope is that will change.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Definitely important to take stock of the reality of things and also aspire perhaps to an alternate reality.
I can just jump in for 2 seconds there.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, I think that that's a really good point, because I think in Ottawa, especially if you're looking at jobs in Ottawa, there is a really big tendency to just immediately go to Carleton or go to the University of Ottawa because they're right here. But I know, like at Global Affairs too, that we're starting to have these same kind of conversations about equity and how do we, like, what does diversity really mean? And if we're the public service and we're supposed to be representative of the Canadian public, how do we start to be more inclusive in how we look at where we're hiring from? And so obviously those things don't change overnight. And so from, like, in that sense, sometimes the school that you do have on your application will impact some of those things. But I think if you, like if you're going through a program and you're getting the skills and you are able to kind of speak about those skills with a lot of confidence, that like having sat in on interviewing different students, you know, I'm more interested in a student who shows up willing to learn and has like some really good skills that they can show me, rather than saying, oh, I went to NIPSI, or oh, I went to JISPI, or I went to Monk. Like, that's great. And sometimes that helps you get the right connection. But if I have to choose between that and somebody who shows up from a different school with a huge appetite to learn and a lot of good skills that they can show me, I think that kind of is starting to have more and more weight, especially as we start talking about equity and inclusion.
I just want to come back and to add to that. It's also about how you tell your own story, and I think that's the important element more and more, and that's what I look for too. Same as Lauren, is who you are as a person.
Absolutely, that element of, sorry, did somebody have something to say?
Sorry, Pablo, it's Priya.
Yes, of course.
I think those are all really excellent points. So, you know, does the name of the school matter? I think the name of the school opens doors, but it's not the only thing that will pave the way. I also think, as other people have brought up the issue of equity, navigating some of these programs as a Black, Indigenous, person of color, LGBTQ two-spirited, you know, your matrix of choices sometimes can be very, very different. As a woman of color, I really wish somebody had told me to talk to other students of color in my various departments and various programs that I've been through, to learn about what their experience is, because I think it would have better prepared me for dealing with things like microaggression and implicit bias, raising questions around decolonizing curriculum, if these are topics of interest to you. If they're not, and you're rushing through a one-year program to be able to say, hey, I have a master's as a means to an end, I mean, maybe these factors are not going to be weighted as highly in your matrix of possibilities. But certainly I think, particularly sort of taking a Western Canadian perspective on this, you know, Vancouver is a major hub for immigration. And we really see a lot of highly qualified personnel coming in with degrees from elsewhere. And I think, I can't say this is a widespread practice, and I actually know it not to be true. But if you end up with a recruiter like me who has a more global background, if I see the name of a top tier university from India or Ethiopia or elsewhere in the Middle East or East Asia, I'm going to know it's a top tier school in that region. And so I think some of that just really depends on the policy space that you're entering, and the institution that you're seeking to gain employment with. So that's all to say, I think on balance, I'm not really sure. School might matter, but it's not sort of a necessary condition for you to sort of gain a foot in the door, as some of my other colleagues have also mentioned. And that just, yeah, for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, you know, sometimes it might not be a top school, but if it has more racialized faculty, if it has more curriculum that's going to speak to your interests and really allow you to shine, you know, those are just as valid reasons than a school's ranking, and you should be completely unafraid to lead with those expectations, because that's really how we're going to get to systems change.
Most definitely. Thank you so much, Priya.
Maybe
I'm trying. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say one maybe final point along the lines of selling your story too. It's don't like apply. If there's a position that you're interested in and you think that you're qualified, even if you don't think that you meet 100% of the requirements to do the job, apply and trust in your ability to tell the employer your story of why you deserve to be there, because you do. And it's really, really easy to talk yourself out of applying for things. And it's really easy to convince yourself that somebody smarter than you, or who went to a better school than you, or who had a better supervisor for their thesis than you is going to apply for a job. But you deserve those positions just as much as they do. So it's really important to just trust in your ability to tell your story and to show that you deserve to be there, because don't count yourself out of any job because you have a value added wherever you decide to end up.
Thank you so much, Lauren. And you know what? I think that is an excellent place to leave it for now. We have reached just past 7:30, and I think it's a great place to leave it. As sort of closing remarks, first of all, thank you so much to our panelists for the time that they so generously gave tonight. If we can get some clap emojis in chat, that would be great. Thank you so much, Michael Thomas, Hingman Leung, Ali Teshpar, Priya Bala-Miller, Dr. Priya Bala-Miller, pardon me, and Lauren Audas. Thank you so much. As some closing remarks before you go, dear attendees, I think a common theme, the common themes that we got through this panel event as a summary for your benefit, is the importance of crafting a personal narrative, either through your experiences in work or through your graduate studies. Really think about, in terms of career advice, how you can present yourself and tell your story. It's also important to ask yourselves what graduate studies mean to you, what it means in your personal familial history, and how you see it helping you in the future. When choosing a school, it's important to, as some of the panelists today said, have a sober look at the importance of what name and program, institution and program could mean, while also making sure that your profile is well rounded out and your narrative well polished to not to go into interviews feeling confident and not rejecting yourself before you even get your foot in the door, which is something that Lauren said, which I found super fascinating. And another thing that I found shared was the importance of mentorship, of having people that you can trust, that people who have gone through these things before, like these esteemed panelists tonight, helping you in your corner, and somebody that you can talk to and bounce ideas off of. And that's why I would be remiss not to mention the Canadian International Council Mentorship Program. We are entering the 3rd year of its execution. The 2020-21 edition was launched this past week. If you sign up to be a member of the Canadian International Council Ottawa branch, you can participate and have access to, as a mentee, many fantastic mentors, including some of the people on this panel. Some of our mentors include current and past professionals at Global Affairs Canada, former diplomats, current diplomats, academics, other people who worked in the private sector through an international affairs lens. These people are a wealth in our network at the CIC, and I recommend that you take advantage of that through the mentorship program. If you want to check it out, I'm sure that my colleague will drop the link in the chat soon. If not, you can also see the link at the bottom of the description in the Eventbrite page. And that's all for us tonight. Thank you so much to RBC, our esteemed partner in this event. Thank you to our panelists, Michael, Hingman, Ali, Dr. Priya Bala-Miller. Sorry about that. I really want to say it out loud fully. And of course, Lauren Audas for your participation. I've been Pablo Mhanna-Sandoval, your moderator for tonight. Thank you so much. And folks, best of luck with those applications. Keep your head up and believe in yourselves. Thank you so much and have a great night, folks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone. Great job, Pablo.
Yes, well done.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you to all of you.
Bye.